So we've got this article from BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, that is called "Process Industries Need a New Strategy for a Changing World." So a bit of a provocative title here. And so this article is available on the publications part of BCG's website. So pretty nice design here. What you can see is that the article opens up straight into the key takeaways. And there seem to be three key takeaways that they want to talk about. So the first is that there is now a lot of change, a lot of disruptions in the process industries that is evident from all the volatility and supply chain disruptions and things like that. And the conclusion that the authors make is that companies need to do something to regain competitive advantage. So pretty typical consulting article. And if we scroll through, we'll see that each of those key takeaways is then described in further detail. And in doing so, the authors of the article included 4 separate charts throughout the body of the article. What we're going to do is spend a bit of time on each of those charts and try to make sense of what either makes them good or makes them not good, so that we can learn a bit about chart making through this exercise. So the first article is this one. It's called Exhibit 1, Commodity Prices Have Grown More Volatile Over the Decades. So overall, it looks like a pretty standard consulting chart. What you can see on it is a bit of a trend line that runs from 1974 up until 2023. The trend line shows something called BCPI, which stands for Bank of Canada Commodity Price Index, which is an index of spot or transaction prices in US dollars across 26 commodities, including energy, materials, minerals, and forest, agriculture, and fishery products. So it's basically some sort of blended average of 26 different commodities that have been tracked over the last several decades. So what the authors have done is they have split the chart into 5 separate sections. So each roughly 10 years long. So 1974 until 1983, 1984 until 1993, 1994 until 2003, and so on through to 2023. So I think overall it's a pretty good chart. It's nice and simple. There's a lot of white space. It's not overloaded with data, and it's pretty clear what it tries to tell you. So the things I like about it, in addition, are also the little bubbles underneath the chart that summarize annualized volatility of returns. And what the authors are trying to do with this chart is they're trying to tell us that, look, 74 through to 2003, volatility was in the green, so relatively acceptable, relatively low, varying between 5.9 and 12.8%. However, starting in 2004, that volatility started to get into the red zone. In the first decade, they're going up to 19.1, and in the second decade, they're going up to 25.3, which is a lot higher than what it was in the preceding 3 decades. So there's some sources, there are some footnotes that provide additional detail, and then of course there is an action title, which is not just a description, but actually tells you the main conclusion from this chart, which is that volatility has gone up on those commodities. So overall, I think it's I would probably call it a 3.5 out of 5 in my book, just because of how well it does the basics, keeping the chart nice and simple, having an action title, having clear sources and footnotes, and just not overcomplicating or not overloading the chart too much. I also like the color shading in the shade of pink, which highlights the 2 decades of interest, 2004 until 2023, and it immediately draws the reader's attention to that period so that you can understand that that is the main part of the chart that they want you to have a look at. And then the part of the chart that's not shaded is there for historical reference, so that you can then appreciate visually how what's happened in 2004 through to 2023 is just different and bigger compared to the previous three decades. So what are the reasons why it's not a 5 out of 5? What I'm missing a little bit is some more insights, something interesting in addition to the fact that volatility has gone up. So no additional takeaways. You could have probably added some more of that, either by making the chart a little bit narrower and putting those dot points on the left-hand side, or adding some callouts for decades of interest. So for example, making the chart not as tall, that will give you a little bit of visual space above the charts, and then you can add some more text there. So for example, a couple of things that I was thinking about when looking at this chart is that it doesn't seem to take into account some of the one-off events that have happened in the last 2 decades. So for example, the 2008 financial crisis, which seems to be responsible for that big spike and then drop in the commodity prices in the middle of the first of the 2 decades of interest. And then secondly, doesn't call out the impact of COVID-19, which is the other major spike and drop in the rightmost decade as well. So I wonder what would happen if you actually normalized for those two one-off events, whether your volatility would then look different. So I think from an intellectual honesty perspective, that's something I would have liked to see. Of course, it would reduce the volatility. Maybe then it would make it green rather than red. Who knows if you really did the maths. But I think something to that effect could have been called out in addition to what's already on the chart, and would have then led you to conclude that the authors have really thought through the chart and they've taken a nuanced approach rather than a bit of a oversimplified approach, which is what it looks like to me looking at this chart. So overall, I would say 3.5 out of 5. Overall pretty good, but could be better. So if we move on, the second chart in this article is this visual one, and it describes the 6 trends that are likely to impact process industries. And the 6 trends are geopolitics, trade policies, shifting demand, supply shortages, sustainability, and changing workforces. So I really like this slide. I would actually probably call it a 5 out of 5 in my book, or 4.5 out of 5 in terms of marking. What I like about it is just how visual it is. It's really hard to make text-based slide visual and interesting, and I think the guys at BCG have really managed to do that here. So you can see that firstly, they're using 3 different sets of colors. So green, blue, and purple. The six diamonds with the text inside of them have been then grouped into sections of 2. So geopolitics and trade policies together, shifting demand and supply shortages together, and then sustainability and changing workforces together, all linked by shades of either green, blue, or purple. I also like how they added visual interest in the form of icons that just kind of watered down what would otherwise be a purely text-based slide, which not as interesting to look at. I like how much white space there is, that they didn't try to overcomplicate it with too much information, just kept it simple. I liked how there is parallel language as well on the chart. So for example, it says in the first one where it says geopolitics, great power relations are trending toward economic blocks. Then on the second one, it says rising tariffs and trade restrictions are impacting global material flows. And the third one, changing consumer behaviors, altering demand for key materials, and so on. So there's always something, then there's a verb, and then there's something that is affected. And so the structure of those sentences is always similar across all of the 6 diamonds, which is also just good and consistent. So the only thing that was a little bit funny on this chart is that when they say source, it says BCG analysis, which I think is a bit redundant because this is a BCG article. Whose analysis else would it be? And maybe if they really wanted to highlight that this piece of thinking was produced by BCG, I think it's just sufficient to say BCG. You don't need to say analysis because that's just self-explanatory. But that's one of the problems that I think happens in the consulting world, is just this persistent use of either team analysis or BCG analysis or somebody else's analysis as a source. It's just a habit, which I don't think actually adds value. Yep, so nice slide. I like it quite a bit. I would give it somewhere between 4.5 and 5 out of 5.